The new CEO fired me, not realizing I was the only one who could speak Arabic with our biggest clients. She called me useless and said they needed younger energy. So I walked away. 4 days later, she regretted it. But that morning, seeing the 8:40 a.m. invite, I felt surprisingly calm. I didn't panic. I simply closed my laptop, grabbed my jacket, and walked toward the elevators. The office felt unnaturally quiet, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. The walk to the fifth floor felt like a funeral procession of one. Colleagues I had known for a decade made fleeting eye contact before burying their faces in their phones. That is how you know it is over. When people who usually wave start treating you like a ghost, the writing is on the wall. Room 5B was a sterile glass box that smelled faintly of industrial lemon cleaner. Inside, Victoria waited at the head of the table, tapping a manicured fingernail against the polished wood surface. Victoria had been CEO for exactly 47 days. The board loved her because she used words like optimization and strategic realignment in every sentence. Beside her sat Denise from HR, clutching a manila folder like a shield. Denise refused to look me in the eye, focusing instead on her uncapped pen. I sat down and folded my hands on the table. Victoria finally looked up, bypassing all pleasantries. She spoke with a tone meant to sound authoritative, but just came off as rehearsed and hollow. "Raymond, thank you for joining us," she began, voice devoid of warmth. "As you know, we are moving toward more modern frameworks." She paused, waiting for me to beg. I stayed silent. "Your role has been identified as legacy infrastructure," she continued. Legacy infrastructure. I was the only person here who understood Gulf business culture or held personal relationships with clients worth $8 million. To her, I was just an outdated server rack. She smiled, a tight expression that never reached her cold eyes. Denise slid the manila folder across the table. "Standard severance. 3 months of pay." Victoria interrupted before I could open it. "We need people who can adapt. This industry is evolving, and frankly, we need younger energy." She let the insult hang there, naked and ugly. I reached for the folder and scanned the first page. They had misspelled my middle name. It was classic Vanguard. I closed the folder and stood up. Victoria looked surprised, then annoyed. She clearly expected a fight or a breakdown. "You don't want to review the terms?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "I've reviewed them," I said, pulling a pen from my pocket. "I'll be gone within the hour." I signed the bottom line without hesitation. What she didn't mention was the UAE delegation arriving Monday morning. What she didn't mention was the contract renewal pending Khalil's approval. I could have warned her. I could have explained that firing me was professional suicide. Instead, I capped my pen, slid the folder back, and walked out. I spent the first 24 hours ignoring the world. I didn't check email. Instead, I drove straight to my brother Danny's place with a 6-pack of root beer. Danny is the only person who can call me an idiot and make it sound like a compliment. He was working on an engine block when I pulled in, wiping grease, stained hands on a rag. "You look like someone ran over your dog," he said, eyeing my suit jacket. "Or did the corporate hive finally spit you out?" I leaned against the garage door and cracked a soda. She called me legacy infrastructure. Said I was too expensive. Danny snorted, tossing his rag aside. "Legacy infrastructure. That's a new one. Usually, they just say you aren't a culture fit." He took a long swig of root beer. "So she fired the only guy who speaks the language of the people paying the bills. Is she stupid? Or just confident?" I watched oil drip from the engine. "The dangerous kind," I said. "The kind that thinks she's smart." I crashed in his guest room that night, sleeping better than I had in months. By Saturday morning, I was back in my own apartment, scrubbing floors with a manic intensity. I needed to purge the last 4 years from my system. I vacuumed and reorganized the kitchen cabinets. Every scrub of the sponge felt like erasing another day of Victoria's condescension. Beneath the labor, a cold knot of strategy tightened in my chest. I wasn't just moving on. I was preparing for the inevitable collision. On Sunday afternoon, I turned my attention to the bookshelf. I pulled down every binder. These weren't company property. They were my personal notes, handwritten annotations on cultural nuances that never made it into the official CRM. I found the Yala Guidelines, a survival manual I had written to keep junior sales reps from offending Gulf clients. I also found the relationship logs, detailing every birthday and handshake deal. Victoria had fired me, but I realized I still held the keys to the kingdom. I sat on the floor, surrounded by paper stacks that represented millions in revenue. My phone buzzed on the desk, a notification from the internal server. My access hadn't been revoked yet. A sloppy IT oversight. I didn't open it. Instead, I sent text messages to former colleagues in Bahrain and Qatar. I wasn't asking for a job, I was planting seeds. Just letting you know I am available, I wrote. The responses came back within minutes. In this business, reputation travels faster than fiber optics. By Sunday night, the apartment felt charged with static electricity. I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker below. I realized then that I wasn't sad about losing the salary or the title. I was angry about the disrespect, the sheer arrogance of discarding human connection for a spreadsheet. My phone buzzed again, this time a calendar reminder for the UAE delegation's arrival. I deleted it. I turned off my phone, opened a beer, and waited for Monday morning to burn the building down. I didn't go near the office building on Monday morning. Instead, I sat on my balcony with a cup of strong coffee, watching the sunrise over the city skyline. My phone sat face down on the metal table, vibrating rhythmically every few minutes. I knew exactly what was happening across town. The 3 black SUVs would be pulling into the circular driveway right about now. The receptionist, wearing a blazer Victoria forced her to buy, would be scrambling to find a visitor badge that didn't exist. The vibrating stopped, then started again with a persistent, angry ring. I finally flipped the phone over. It was Oz, our IT security admin and resident cynic. Oz lived in the server room and communicated almost exclusively in memes and sarcasm. I answered on the second ring. Tell me everything, I said, skipping the hello. Oh, it is worse than you think, Oz whispered, his voice tinny through the speaker. It is a train wreck in slow motion. I hope you have popcorn. They walked in like royalty. Oz narrated, his voice dropping lower. Khalil Al-Arsi is wearing a charcoal suit that costs more than my car. He didn't even look at the front desk. I could picture it perfectly. Khalil moved with the heavy gravity of a man who controlled energy grids. Victoria tried to intercept them in the lobby. Oz continued. She had this frozen smile, like a beauty pageant contestant. She reached out to shake his hand. Khalil didn't take it. He just looked past her shoulder. He didn't ask about the contract, Oz said, breathless with glee. He didn't ask about the quarterly numbers. He just stood there, hands behind his back, and asked one single question. I took a sip of coffee, savoring the bitterness. Where is brother Raymond? I closed my eyes. I had spent 4 years earning that title. It meant I wasn't just a vendor, I was family. Victoria froze, Oz said. She actually stuttered. She told him you were no longer with the organization due to restructuring. The silence was loud, bro. Like, physical pain loud. Oz paused, probably checking the hallway to ensure he wasn't being overheard by management. Khalil looked at her for a full 10 seconds. Then, he turned to his operations manager and said something in Arabic. Victoria kept smiling, nodding like she understood. She clearly thought he was translating her brilliance. I laughed, a short, sharp sound. He wasn't translating, I told Oz. He was asking if she was the jester or the king. Then he did the hand wave, Oz said. He just flicked his wrist and said, Yalla. The whole team turned around like synchronized swimmers. They didn't even make it to the elevators. They just walked right back out the front door. My chest tightened with a mix of pride and regret. That relationship had survived market crashes and supply chain crises. It took Victoria less than 15 minutes to sever the artery. Did anyone try to stop them? I asked, gripping the phone tight. Victoria ran after them. Oz laughed. But the legal counsel stopped at the door. He said something to the receptionist. She thinks it was a blessing. I frowned. What exactly did he say? Oz did his best to mimic the guttural sounds. May God protect you from your own house. I let out a low whistle. It wasn't a blessing. It was a condemnation. It took exactly 14 minutes for Victoria to lose a relationship I spent 4 years building. By Wednesday, the silence from the office had morphed into a chaotic frequency of panicked updates. Oz was my only window into the burning building. He told me the sales team had gone into overdrive, firing off apology emails like scattershot into the dark. One account manager, terrifyingly, had addressed a formal letter to Mr. Al-Kuwait. It wasn't a typo, they genuinely thought the country's name was a person. I groaned, rubbing my temples. That specific mistake was listed on page 4 of my briefing binder. Victoria wasn't accepting responsibility, she was looking for a scapegoat. She stormed into the IT department around noon, her heels clicking like gunfire on the linoleum. She demanded access to my old hard drive, convinced I had sabotaged the relationship before leaving. Find me the correspondence, she ordered Oz, standing over his desk. I want to see exactly what he told them. She thought she was hunting for my negligence. In reality, she was authorizing the excavation of her own professional grave. Oz became a digital archaeologist. He sifted through 4 years of my archived Outlook folders, while Victoria hovered, waiting for a smoking gun. What he found instead was a masterclass in diligence. He found the "Do not do this" folders I had shared with the executive team quarterly. He found the cultural briefing documents that tracked religious holidays and dietary restrictions. He found the read receipts, time-stamped and logged, proving that Victoria had received every single warning I had ever sent. Then he opened the file labeled Yala Guidelines. It was a survival manual for the Gulf market, written in plain English for the C-suite. It explicitly warned against changing point of contact personnel without a 6-month transition period. Oz took screenshots of the file metadata. It showed the last time the document was opened was 3 years ago by the previous CEO. Victoria had never even clicked on it. She had fired the pilot without ever looking at the flight manual. The real weapon wasn't in my sent folder, though. It was in the archives. Oz texted me a screenshot late Thursday night with a single skull emoji. It was an email from Khalil's general counsel, dated 8 months prior. It was a contract addendum, clear as crystal. It stated that the service agreement was contingent upon continuity of senior liaison staff. It named me specifically. Mr. Raymond Nash is designated as the primary relationship anchor. The legal text read. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. This wasn't just bad management anymore. It was gross negligence. Victoria hadn't just insulted a client, she had triggered a breach of contract clause that nullified the renewal automatically. She had archived this email without reading it, likely flagging it as administrative noise. Oz knew exactly what he was looking at. This is the kill shot, he texted. If the board sees this, she isn't just fired, she is uninsurable. Do not send that to her? I typed back, my thumbs moving fast. She will delete it. Oz sent back a winking GIF. He wasn't going to give the evidence to the executioner. Instead, he forwarded the entire packet to the general counsel and the board's audit committee, seeking Denise in HR to create an unbreakable chain of custody. The truth was buried on a server in the basement, and Oz had just handed a shovel to the directors. It took 48 hours for the bomb to detonate properly. I spent the weekend gardening, ripping up weeds with cathartic aggression. By Monday, the atmosphere at Vanguard had shifted seismically. Oz texted me that Victoria's office door was closed, and 2 members of the board were seen entering with grim faces. They weren't there for a strategy session. I kept my phone in my pocket, volume up, waiting for the inevitable ring. When the screen finally lit up, it wasn't HR. It was the general counsel. Mr. Nash, The general counsel's voice was smooth, like expensive whiskey. We have discovered some procedural irregularities regarding your departure. He was trying to frame a wrongful termination as a paperwork error. I wiped dirt from my hands and sat on the patio bench, enjoying the cool breeze. Is that so? I asked, keeping my voice flat. We would like to discuss a potential consulting arrangement to smooth over the transition with the Gulf accounts. It was the corporate version of begging on their knees. He quoted a number that was insulting. It was my old hourly rate, rated for a 3-week engagement. They wanted me to come back, clean up the mess, and then leave again, all for the price of a used sedan. I let the silence stretch on the line, heavy and uncomfortable, until I heard him clear his throat nervously. I have other commitments. I lied smoothly. My schedule is currently quite full with new opportunities. The lie hit its mark perfectly. He panicked. We can authorize a retainer, he said quickly, his composure cracking. Double your previous rate. I laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that surely unsettled him. You aren't paying for my time, Arthur. You are paying for the 4 years of trust Victoria incinerated in 4 minutes. I watched a hawk circle overhead, hunting in the clear sky. Here is the new price. 3 times my daily rate, a 6-month minimum, and the entire contract value is paid up front, non-refundable. He choked. That is unprecedented, Arthur sputtered. We can't pay 6 months in advance for services not yet rendered. I leaned back, closing my eyes against the sun. Then you can explain to the board why you lost the Allercy account permanently and triggered a breach lawsuit. I am sure they will be understanding. I knew they had seen the email. I knew they knew I was the only contractual way out of this disaster. I'll send the term sheet over, I said. You have 1 hour. After hanging up, I checked my personal email. A competitor, a firm based in Bahrain that had been trying to poach me for years, had sent a formal offer letter. The salary was higher than what I had just demanded from Vanguard. I realized with a jolt that I wasn't just bluffing. I actually didn't need them at all. The realization transformed my lingering anxiety into absolute, cold steel resolve. They were drowning in the deep end, and I owned the only boat. 45 minutes later, my inbox pinged. It was the contract from Vanguard, signed by the board chairman himself, not Victoria. They had capitulated on every single term. They even waived the exclusivity clause, desperate to get me back in the building before the next client call. I looked at the digital signature. It represented a year's worth of salary for 6 months of part-time work. They thought they were negotiating a consulting fee. I knew I was negotiating a ransom. Walking back into Vanguard felt surreal. The security guard, who usually waved me through, stopped to hand me a visitor badge. It was a flimsy piece of plastic, but it felt heavy with irony. I wasn't an employee anymore, I was an expensive problem they had to solve. The lobby seemed brighter. The air cleaner. Sarah at the front desk did a double take, her eyes darting from my face to the badge. She whispered into her headset as I passed. Word was spreading faster than a virus. I wasn't just back, I was back on my own terms. Room 5B was waiting, the scene of my execution now set for my resurrection. Victoria sat at the head of the table again, but her posture had collapsed. The sharp angles of her shoulders were rounded by exhaustion and defeat. Arthur, the general counsel, sat beside her, sweating through his starch, stiffened collar. A thick document sat in the center of the table like a sacrificial offering. I didn't sit down immediately. I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline, letting them wait. Power is not just about money, it is about controlling the flow of time. I finally took my seat and pulled the contract toward me. Arthur uncapped a pen and offered it, but I ignored him. I took out my reading glasses and began to read, line by line. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic tapping of Victoria's foot beneath the table. They wanted me to sign quickly to end the awkwardness. I turned the pages slowly, savoring the sound of the paper. On page 9, buried in a dense paragraph about deliverables, I found the trap they had set. Clause 14b was titled, Knowledge Transfer and Continuity. It stipulated that the consultant must provide comprehensive training manuals and on-site shadowing to a designated replacement. They still didn't get it. They were willing to pay my ransom, but they wanted to ensure they never had to pay it again. They wanted to drain my brain, document my relationships, and then discard me the moment the 6 months were up. It was a desperate attempt to buy my obsolescence with my own work. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. They thought I was desperate for the work. I reached into my jacket pocket and produced my own pen. It was a heavy, red ink fountain pen I used for marking up drafts. Without saying a word, I drew a thick, violent line through the entire paragraph. The red ink bled into the white paper like a fresh wound. I initialed the margin with a sharp scratch. Arthur let out a strangled noise of protest. Victoria stopped tapping her foot. I looked up, capping the pen with a loud click. That clause is removed, I said softly. I don't train replacements. I solve problems. Arthur sputtered, trying to regain control of the room. Mr. Nash, that is standard language for all consulting agreements. We need to ensure business continuity. I leaned forward, my voice dropping an octave. You had continuity, Arthur. You fired him last Thursday. I pointed to the red slash on the page. You are paying for my results, not my methodology. If you want a teacher, hire a university professor. If you want the Allercy account to stay active, you sign the contract as amended. I pushed the paper back toward him. Take it or leave it. Arthur looked at Victoria, desperate for backup. She stared at the contract, then at me. Her eyes were filled with a venomous mix of hatred and resignation. She knew she had no leverage. The board was watching, the client was waiting, and the clock was ticking. If she let me walk out again, her career was over. She let out a long, shaky breath, the sound of a balloon finally losing its air. Accept the changes, Arthur, she whispered, her voice brittle. Just get it done. She refused to look at me as she said it. Arthur scrambled to countersign the margin, his hand trembling slightly. But the ritual wasn't over. The retainer, I reminded them. Up front. Non-refundable. Arthur slid a company check across the table. It was already filled out, but it needed a second signature for the amount. Victoria had to pick up her pen. I watched her sign her name on the line that authorized a transfer of funds larger than her annual bonus directly into my pocket. It was a moment of perfect narrative symmetry. She was literally signing off on the cost of her own arrogance. I picked up the check and folded it neatly into my pocket. It felt warm against my chest, a shield against any future indignity. I'll start calling the client from my home office, I said, standing up. I won't be needing a desk here. I didn't wait for a dismissal. I walked out of room 50B, leaving them alone in the silence of their expensive mistake. In the hallway, I passed Oz, who was pretending to fix a printer. He saw my face and gave me a subtle thumbs up. I hadn't even opened my laptop yet. The flight to Dubai was 14 hours of strategizing in the dark. I landed in a humidity that hit like a physical wall, smelling of jet fuel and desert dust. My driver, arranged by Khalil's office, was waiting at the gate with a sign that simply read, Brother Raymond. It was a small gesture, but it signaled that the diplomatic freeze was thawing. I went straight to the hotel to shower and change into a fresh suit. The meeting was in 2 hours. I wasn't just fixing a contract, I was performing reconstructive surgery on a shattered reputation. The stakes felt incredibly heavy. The conference room in Khalil's tower overlooked the Burj Khalifa. Khalil's technical team looked skeptical, arms crossed, and faces grim. They had felt the insult of the walkout deeply. I started by apologizing, not for myself, but for the administrative realignment error that had caused the confusion. It was a polite fiction that allowed everyone to save face. I presented the new roadmap, emphasizing my full autonomy. Slowly, the tension in the room began to dissipate. By lunch, we were arguing about technical specs again. We were back in business, but the scars remained visible. That night, I checked the news from home. Oz had sent a link to an industry press release. Vanguard CEO steps down to pursue new opportunities. The headline was polite, but the timing was brutal. Victoria hadn't lasted 4 months. The board forced her out to stop the bleeding, replacing her with a caretaker who knew better than to touch my division. I felt a strange lack of satisfaction. Her resignation was just a transaction. She was gone, but the corporate system that created her arrogance remained intact. I closed the laptop, feeling nothing but fatigue. 2 days later, the real test arrived. Khalil invited me to dinner at his private estate. This wasn't a business meeting, it was a judgment. I arrived at sunset, the sky painted in bruised purples. Servants led me to a terrace where Khalil sat smoking shisha. He stood to embrace me. "Welcome back to the living," he said, eyes crinkling with amusement. We ate mez, talking about his sons and falconry. He was testing my commitment, gauging if I was truly back or just a mercenary. The air was thick with unsaid things. I knew I had to speak. When the coffee was served, thick and dark, I cleared my throat. I couldn't lie to him. "Khalil," I started, setting my cup down. "I need you to know the truth about my arrangement." He paused, the pipe hovering near his lips. "I am only a consultant," I admitted. "My contract expires in 6 months. I will not be renewing it." I watched his face carefully. I was risking the deal, risking the millions Vanguard was paying me, but building a bridge on a lie would only lead to another collapse. I had to come clean. Khalil didn't look angry. He looked curious. "And where will you go, Brother Raymond?" he asked softly. I took a deep breath. "I have accepted a role with Yusuf's firm in Manama. I start the day my non-compete expires." Yusuf was Vanguard's direct competitor. It was a declaration of war against my current employer, spoken in the quiet privacy of a friend's terrace. "I can't bring you with me yet," I said. "But when the current contract ends, I will be building something new there." I waited for his reaction. The silence stretched out, heavy and absolute. Khalil placed his pipe on the table and leaned forward. A slow smile spread across his face, genuine and sharp. "Yusuf is a good man," he said. "He understands honor." Khalil picked up a date and ate it thoughtfully. "Vanguard thinks they bought your loyalty. They do not understand that loyalty cannot be bought." He looked me in the eye. "We will sign the renewal with Vanguard for 1 year. It keeps the lights on. But we will not sign for 3. He was giving me his blessing to steal the account legally. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. "You were worried I would be angry about your departure," Khalil said. "But I was already preparing to leave." He gestured to the skyline. "Before you returned, I had already instructed legal to draft termination papers. Vanguard was finished the moment you walked out of that room." I realized then that my return hadn't saved the relationship, it had merely put it on life support. "I only agreed to meet because I wanted to see where you would land," he confessed. He was never staying. He was waiting for me. We shook hands on it, not as client and vendor, but as conspirators. The deal was simple. I would keep the Vanguard account stable, ensuring no disruptions for his operations. In exchange, he would quietly prepare his organization to migrate to Yusuf's platform when my new tenure began. I wasn't saving Vanguard's account. I was packing its parachute so the client could land safely at my new firm. It was the ultimate malicious compliance. I would do exactly what my contract said. Maintain the relationship. I just wouldn't tell them where that relationship was heading. I flew back to the States the next morning with a signed 1-year renewal in my briefcase. To the board, it would look like a victory. To Arthur, it would justify the exorbitant check he had written. But as the plane climbed over the Persian Gulf, looking down at the blue water, I knew it was a time bomb. I ordered a drink and toasted the empty seat next to me. I had 6 months to collect my paycheck and watch the clock run down. Victoria was gone, but her lesson would cost them everything. The 6 months passed in a blur of billable hours and quiet sabotage. On my final day, I submitted an invoice that would buy a small house in the suburbs. There was no exit interview, no HR folder, and definitely no severance package discussions. I simply left my visitor badge on the security desk and walked out into the crisp autumn air. The interim CEO, a nervous man named Greg, didn't even know I was leaving. I checked my bank account balance on the sidewalk. The numbers looked like a phone number. It was finally done. I drove straight to Nico's place, low and slow. The air inside was thick with hickory smoke and the sound of blues guitar, a sharp contrast to the sterile silence of Vanguard's fifth floor. Nico had closed the front section for us, setting up a table near the pit where the heat was intense and comforting. Danny was already there, nursing a beer and laughing at something Oz was saying. They looked up when I walked in. No one asked how it went. They saw the relief on my face and knew the war was over. Nico emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of brisket that was black as coal on the outside and pink in the middle. He slid a glass of bourbon into my hand before I could even sit down. To the consultant class, Nico toasted, raising his own glass high. And to getting paid stupidly well for doing exactly what you were doing before. We clinked glasses, the amber liquid burning pleasantly on the way down. To legacy infrastructure, Danny added, grinning over his ribs. May it never be optimized again. Uz wiped barbecue sauce from his chin and leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You know the best part. They actually think they won. He swirled his drink, watching the ice melt. Greg told the board yesterday that the Gulf accounts are stabilized for the long term. He has no idea the renewal is only for 12 months. Oz laughed, a dark, satisfied sound. I give it 3 weeks after you start at Yusuf's firm before they realize the client is packing his bags too. I looked around the table at the faces of the people who had backed me when the floor fell out. Danny, who offered me a bed. Nico, who helped me negotiate. Oz, who risked his job to find the truth. I realized then that Victoria's biggest mistake wasn't miscalculating the contract value. It was assuming that business is just math. It isn't. It is people. It is the 3 a.m. phone calls and the handwritten notes. It is the loyalty that money cannot manufacture. My phone buzzed in my pocket, vibrating against the check I still hadn't deposited. It was a message from Khalil. The Falcon is ready to fly. See you in Manama next week. I smiled and put the phone away. Tomorrow, I would start as the vice president of international operations for a company that actually understood my worth. I took a bite of the brisket, savoring the smoke and the spice. I looked at the check one last time. The best thing Victoria ever did was fire me.